time trying to convince the legislature that taxes are low and spending is low, because that's exactly what they want. They are totally with you on that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's the part where we convince them why it's a bad thing. Yes, why is it not a good idea to spend as little as we do? So, all right. So, I don't know.
Okay,
So y'all are going to ask me questions, or?
Yeah, I'll start. So will you just first start by telling us your name, when, and where you were born?
My name is Eva de Luna Castro. Born in San Pedro de las Colonias, very long name, in Coahuila, which is near Saltillo. I don't know if you're familiar with Saltillo, our Austin sister city, and Torreon, which is like an irrigated area that's mostly cotton, I think. And the other interesting thing about San Pedro is that's where Francisco Madero's house is, before he went to Berkeley and got radicalized. So born in Mexico, grew up mostly in the Midwest. Went to Harvard undergrad, went to the LBJ School of Public Affairs. That's what brought me to Texas. And I have been the budget analyst at Every Texan, formerly the Center for Public Policy Priorities, since October of 1998. And it's been a wild ride, as they say. You're trying to fix the lights. You can turn all of them on, I think. There you go. Yeah. All right. Although when you use a video, you can always gray out my face like a witness protection program.
Exactly. Well, if anything you don't want us to share, we'll blur your face and what is it there?
Modify the voice.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. So where did you work before Center for Public Policy? You worked for a state agency, right?
Yes, right before I came to work here, I worked at the controller's office in the research division. And at that time, it was kind of like, well, I'd say it's always a political agency. It was headed by John Sharp. I left right before the lady with too many names became controller. Before then, I worked for a state representative who was on appropriations. So I actually did, when I tell people that I've been following the budget since 1991, I mean that state rep that I worked for was on appropriations, but I wouldn't say he knew everything that was in the budget, just the parts of it that affected his Houston district. That's usually how legislators know what's in the budget. It's all local. But let's see, so controller's office for about 7 years, and then a year as a state legislative aide in the House. That's like the work that was relevant to what I do now. But most of what I learned about the state budget, I'd say, was kind of on-the-job training, especially here as things have changed about what we work on and how we do the work with everybody who works on school finance and healthcare and all that. So just kind of relevant things that I learned, so that we could use it to explain to staff and the media how the budget process works, how general revenue, like why that matters, just kind of the demystifying the budget. I think it was the short version of how I would describe what I do.
So were you doing policy at Harvard? Is that where you kind of started your interest in state policy or government, I should say?
I was not a government major. I was a history and literature of Latin America major, which is a double concentration, which means 1 week we would study the history of a particular country, and then the next week the literature professor would explain how novels and poems or whatever had been affected by what was going on in the country. And then also the other feedback effect, like how is history shaped by what's happening culturally. So it was an interesting concentration. But what I learned from that was that geography matters. We had one really cool professor who gave us like a piece of paper that just had an outline of South America on it. And you had to draw in all the country's borders and mountain chains and rivers, like just to understand how geography shapes a country. And also, of course, knowing like the national politics. Why did things turn out the way they did? So it was interesting in that it helped me understand a couple of things. The one that's most relevant to what we do here now is if something happened at some point in history, that means we can do it again. So if Texas was once 30th in per resident spending, that means we could do that again. We don't have to be 48th or 50th. It's like, so the fact that it is possible means at one point our leaders were willing to do something, or it might also mean that all the other states were doing absolutely nothing. But just kind of understanding, like in the long arc of history, if something at one point was the right thing to do, then it can be done again. It's not impossible. So a lot of times, as you know, we'll go to the legislature and we'll tell them, well, Oregon is doing this or Minnesota is doing that, and they'll be like, yeah, this is not Oregon. But just kind of helping them understand, if in Texas history the right thing was done, that means we can find the will to do it again. But I'd say policy, public policy, I really started studying mostly at the LBJ school. And at that time, there were a lot of people there studying like Chinese water policy or something that LBJ would have been like, why did I create this school if you're just going to study something that's not relevant? Like he was about Texas and politics and arm twisting and all of that. So I think the track that I took there was more about state and local and kind of federal, like the partnership, like how do those three levels of government combine to provide the services that we need on a day-to-day basis.
So what was it like when you started with CPPP? What brought you here?
That's a good question. I'll give you the true answer. I actually avoided applying for the job that was open for a long time. There was a job posting at the controller's office in the room where the copy machine was. I saw it there, but it said like they were looking for a health and human service analyst, somebody who had to understand AFDC and food stamps and WIC and all these programs that were all acronyms and federal and just kind of alphabet soup stuff. And I was like, ugh, I do not want to know any more about that than I already do. The job posting was there because the lady who had the job, Marcia, who has like ties to the Benedictine sisters, like she was one of the, I think, original employees at CPPP, but she did foster care and cash assistance and all kinds of programs that I really didn't know much about. And I thought the job that I took would have to be like continuing her portfolio, so that's why I was not interested. And a friend of Ann Dunkelberg's told me, it's like, no, actually, you could kind of make the job something else if that's what you need it to be, something more general. He's like, just apply and check it out. And I went to the interview. I think the first one was just with 2 people at CPPP. The second one was a scary one that I don't think you had to go through, where you have like a panel of people interviewing you, where you're asked what causes poverty, what is the root cause of poverty, so it's like a very intimidating way. So the second interview, I think there's like 10 people in the room, but I remember seeing, before I went to that interview, I read Dick's Texas Taxes, and we had a couple of kind of evergreen reports at the time that I thought gave me a good sense of what working but poor. I think that report might already have been done in the early days. So I got the job. I don't know if I answered the poverty question correctly, but but what it was to work there was we were in that little blue house in East Austin and all kind of crammed in on top of each other. And let's see, the 99 session, I'm trying to remember if that was a particularly bad one. I don't think it was. 2001 and 2003 were when things started to get towards the first budget crisis. But I'd say that when I first got here, I learned what everybody else did and tried to figure out how what I brought to the center could actually be helpful in some way. So I think I just kind of tried to figure out who does what here and where do we need people to pay the most attention. One thing that was very different back then was that we actually had cash assistance in Texas. But Patrick Brissett worked a lot on AFDC, which turned into TANF. And there was so much time spent on that. Unfortunately, even back then, I don't think it reached more than a couple 100,000 Texans. Now it reaches maybe 40,000, which is why we don't work on that anymore. It's like, why spend all your time working on something that's not going to help hardly anybody? I mean, for the people who need it, it's seriously important. But yeah, school finance, Medicaid and CHIP, all of those areas. So I think just kind of from the beginning, it was like trying to figure out how can I be like the connector of all the other important things that we work on here. And then also choosing not to know about some things so that somebody else can keep being the expert, so I don't step on anybody's toes and say something wrong, because we're all about being credible and accurate, so.